All right, hi everybody. So I wanted to take a moment because I've been helping a couple of friends try to adjust their settings for mid-range to low-end computers. So I'm currently on my old rig that I used to stream on before we got the upgrade, and I kind of wanted to go through some of the things that you can try to scale back on or tweak accordingly to kind of give yourself the best chance of streaming or recording on an older setup. The first thing I want to show you is under settings in advanced. So these settings are both for OBS Studio or Stream Elements OBS. There are similar settings in Streamlabs, but I don't have it to currently find the exact location, so you have to look for something similar. If you can't find anything, always reach out, let me know, and I'll try to do my best to figure out where that setting may be. But however, we're going to start in the advanced. The main thing here that we're adjusting is process priority. We want to shift this to high or as high as possible. What this does is by upping the process priority, you're telling your computer to no matter what, keep OBS running first, which means if you are capping out on resources, it's more likely to lag or crash the game and not your stream. So by putting this high, we're giving OBS top priority to access to the CPU or GPU accordingly on how we're recording, which we'll go over in a second. Your output scaled resolution makes a big difference in terms of how much resources it's going to take. If you're on a mid to lower end computer, there's no reason you should be trying to push 1080p. You're just going to cripple your machine. So set your output scaled resolution down to 720. Pretty standard range. You can try going lower than that if you need to, but you should, most middle range machines should be able to handle 720. For this downscale filter, this is something just recently I've been told about switching. And if you are downscaling, switch to Langzos sharpen scaling with 36 samples. It's the best downscale filter. It'll help reduce some of the screen tearing and the blurriness you see during motion. Common FPS, again, you can leave that at 60, or if you're still having issues, drop that to 30. It will lower the amount of resources it takes to generate that output. In our output settings, so because I can't change these settings while recording, I have each side set up to the other one so I can show you the difference. So the first thing we're going to look at is your encoding option. So the encoding option, the main difference between the two is a question of what game are you playing, and does that game have a lot of GPU? Does it take a lot of GPU resources to run that game, or does it take a lot of CPU resources to run that game? And depending upon also what your computer is, you may or may not even have options to do an NVENC encoding. NVENC encoding is basically using your GPU, your graphics card, to run the processing for you and not your CPU. So if you're having an issue where you're trying to stream and you're looking at your CPU spike to 100%, if you have a graphics card that you can switch to NVENC and the game you're playing doesn't take a ton of graphics, it will offset that load and give you a lot more wiggle room or buffer room on your CPU to run things. In addition, on mid to lower end computers, really limit the number of browser sources you're adding to 1 to 2 at max. The more browser sources you bring in, the more resources and CPU, even with NVENC, that you're going to need. So reducing, so again, if you're using Stream Elements or Streamlabs, combine all your things into one overlay so you have one browser source to load. And eventually, when you get a bigger machine or a better rig, you'll want to split those out because then it's easier to manage and update them. But for starting out, try to get your browser sources to as few as possible. It'll save a ton of resources on your machine. So if you're using a software encoder, which is the X264, you're going to be set to CVR, which is consistent bitrate. This means that every bitrate you send up is going to be the same amount of bit rates as the one before it. So that's the only setting you should really use here, especially for Twitch, if you're streaming to Twitch. For your bitrate, the max you can go as an affiliate or below affiliate level on Twitch is 6,000 kilobytes per second. There, again, if you're having issues with encoding, you're having issues with freezing, and you know your speed, if you're not getting 12 megabits upload speed continuously, then you don't even want to go to 6,000. You want to go half of whatever your speed is that you're consistently getting over time, so you can run a speed test on your speed test sites and look at your upload speed, and you want to be half of that consistency. But again, you can only go to 6,000 anyway. The other part is, the higher your bit rate, the more resources it takes to run that. So if you're having an issue when you're trying to run at 4,500 or 6,000 bit rate, go down to 3,000, go down to 2,500. Again, you're going to see a little more blurriness on your stream, but that's better than you constantly skipping frames and dropping half the frames and then stuttering, right? A little bit of blurriness versus stuttering is better. In relation to the stuttering, this setting I'm testing this weekend, and I'll let you know more, but I watched 17 different videos on this topic. Keyframe intervals, everyone says set this to 2. It's the best setting for Twitch. It'll help remove some of that motion blur we're seeing, mainly like for those that are streaming ESO or other games. When we do a lot of movement, there's a lot of motion that comes into play, and it blurs the recording or the stream. Putting keyframe intervals to 2 will help reduce that. So if you don't have this set to 2 and you're using 264, do so. For the CPU usage, the main goal here is just to adjust this. The higher you go, the less resources it takes, but again, the worse the image may come out at the end. So you want to go, so it's like I would recommend trying very fast. If it's still having issues, go to super fast. If it's still having issues, go to ultra fast. If you have a really higher end computer, then you can go further down here, which will make the image and quality better for a CPU encoding, but it's going to be way more taxing on the CPU. So you kind of want to gauge what your computer can handle, but start on very fast and go up or down accordingly. Again, people running slow are running a Threadripper 16-core processor. So really, you're gonna find to start here, and if you're on an older or mid-range computer, you want to go up to ultra fast. Profile tuning you can leave to none for software side. So the main thing on here, set your key intervals to 2, CBR, set this to at least very fast, and if you're still having issues, go up to ultra fast and see if that helps you. Again, rescaling our output, we're rescaling to 720p because again, for mid to lower range computers, it will still look okay. It's still very watchable, and it's way less taxing. Trying to go up to 1080p and output at 1080p is a ton more. This computer, which again, is not a bad computer, but is 4 to 5 years old, can't do 1080p output. I just can't. So like, know the limits of your machine and scale down accordingly. So that's if you're using the software encoder. If you're using a NVENC encoder, which again, the NVENC is mostly on NVIDIA cards. I think some of the newer AMDs have it as well, but basically it's removing all that workload to your GPU. So as long as you're not playing a graphic intensive GPU game, you're offsetting it and giving more wiggle room to your processor, your CPU. If you are using an NVENC encoder, same thing. It's still CBR. It's still set this key intervals to 2. Again, your bitrate, you can start as high as 6,000. Keep going down until you get consistency without dropping frames. Again, a good range is usually around 3K, 2.5K for older mid-range machines. So again, keep lowering it until you find that nice wiggle room where it's not taking too much to keep a consistent stream without dropping half your frames. For your preset, you can again start at max quality. If you start having issues and it's still not working, go to max performance. See how that does for you. Really just kind of try between those two. You can try performance and quality, but again, I think if you're going to do it, either do max quality or max performance and see how it goes. Profile, I set to high. I haven't seen any major differences switching it off of that, so I would just leave it at high. You might be able to save some resources. Right now, everything I've been reading recently says there's an issue with the look ahead. Keep it off for now until we know more. But every video from the last 3 months has said that look ahead's having some issues. People that are still in the old setups keep turning it back on, but some versions of like Streamlabs doesn't even let you turn this on right now because it knows that there's an outstanding issue. So just leave look ahead off, leave this turned on. But the main thing you're switching here is again the keyframe intervals. Put it to 2. It'll help reduce the blur in motion of your games. The other thing that you can do here, if your system will handle it, is on your audio track, when you go into it, to get to these settings, if you're not seeing these, on your top under output mode, switch this to advanced. And I'll probably add this at the beginning as like a cut-in just to kind of remind you. Make sure output's on advanced to see these settings. In your audio, by default, all of our audio is at 160 bits per second. You can up this to 320 on the tracks that you're using for your stream and recordings. Doing that literally will increase the quality of your audio, which is one of the most important things when streaming. It's like the video is great, having the gameplay is great, you being a personality is fantastic, but like we need to be able to hear you. We need to hear your side of the story. You're what makes the game unique to what you're doing. So putting this, even if the other settings have to go down a little more, having your audio be as clear and solid as you can is what's going to impact it the most. So you can, right now, even on this machine before I switched, I was prioritizing the audio first and put that to 320. So you can literally double the bandwidth of your audio with just a simple setting change in your settings. So those are the big things. If you're using, so it's basically, if you know that you're having a game that's taking a lot of your graphics, then try, and it's not working well, try switching your encoder to software, because then you'll be putting the load back on your CPU, leaving room on your GPU for the game. Vice versa, if you're playing a game that's not very graphically intensive, but you're noticing that your CPU is having issues keeping up, switch your stream to the encoder or the NVENC codec, and that will put the load on your GPU and saving resources on your GPU. If your GPU can handle it, it is more efficient and better to run it off the GPU in terms of long term. It'll help more, but you don't necessarily. But again, it doesn't always come down to what's the best. Like I was helping a streamer just yesterday, and they were trying to do VR. And VR, I know because I've been testing it, is extremely GPU heavy. And they have a really decent machine. They have a machine that's only 2 to 3 years old, right? There's nothing wrong with their machine. But when you're trying to stream VR to a headset, that's like that's 80% to 90% of their GPU already being consumed. So then when they were also then trying to use the GPU encoder, it was maxing out the system, and they were stuttering, dropping frames, and buffering all over the place. By simply switching it and letting the VR use the GPU and then have the stream go through the CPU encoder, the software encoder, it was still a little buffery because of the still maxing out, but it was way more smoother and watchable. It was way more of a watchable experience because, again, we were deviating those workloads to 2 different sources so that it wasn't just one side getting smashed until it couldn't handle it anymore. If you have any questions, you can always find me on my Discord. Link is down below. Reach out to me, let me know, or leave a comment. I'll try to respond. But this is basically, I've always seen all the videos where it's like, if you have the top end machine, these are the settings you want to start with. And that's, for a lot of us, that's not the case. A lot of us are trying to make do with what we have. So I wanted to give you something that would show you why we're making the decisions we're making and what we're doing. So a quick recap, put yourself down to 720. Don't try to stream a 1080 on an older machine. It's not worth it. It takes up way too much resources. Downscale filter under video, Langzos, which is higher samples, which means it'll be a better version of the downscaling. It'll look more clear. This, very easily, put this to 30 FPS. It'll still be a watchable experience and take way less resources. There's no reason to set this to 60 if you're concerned that your machine might not be able to handle it. So consider dropping your FPS to 30. Advanced, set your processor to high. And set your processor to high so that your computer is giving OBS the top priority and making sure that it's staying running. On your output, choose what's worked better for your setup, whether it's a GPU encoder or a CPU encoder. If you only have one option, then that's kind of where you're at. But again, same thing. Make sure it's set to downscale to 720. Don't try to do it in 1080. It's too much resources. Adjust your bitrate down to where, not just because of what your internet can handle, but again, how much you're having to send out, how much encoding you're having to do, lowering that number can help you. Before I started trying to raise that, I was doing 2500 for a year plus, and it was fine. So definitely don't feel like you have to be at 6,000 or it's not worth even trying. You can definitely go down. But on either side, software or video, CBR, keyframe 2, and then again, max quality is fine. Try max performance if you're still having an issue. Profile is high. Cycle visual tuning should be turned on. Look ahead, turn off right now. I don't know, I'm still doing research as to what's wrong with it, but I've seen enough people say that there are issues with it, and certain versions of the software even have it disabled where you can't turn it on. So to be safe, since it's not doing a terrible difference right now, just turn this off and don't worry about it for now. IO bitrate 320 if you want to double your audio headroom so that you can have a clear, crisper audio quality. That's it for me. I'm Sci-Fang. I stream every week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m. Eastern on Twitch. We currently play a lot of ESO and 7 Days to Die, as well as some Valheim. Yes. So thank you for watching. Again, any questions, leave me a comment down below. Join my Discord if you want to ask questions there. I'm always happy to help as many people as I can. And I figured I would just do it this way so I could have one source I could point to everyone as to what decision you're making and why you're making it and how it might help you. One final note, again, really look at your sources that are coming into OBS that are from outside, basically browser sources, web sources. Every one of those you add, you're adding a lot of headroom to your GPU or CPU. So you really want to, if you're running Stream Elements or Streamlabs and you've got all those great web-based UIs, which are fantastic for setting up an overlay setup, make sure you combine them in Stream Elements, Streamlabs so that it's one output source. You don't want multiple browser sources if you're struggling. Have a great day, guys. I'm out of here.
Hey guys, different day, different outfit, but I just wanted to jump in here. We're on my other computer now, the new machine they were streaming off of, but I wanted to jump in with a last quick tip that I remembered when helping a friend out last night. Your browser source overlay. So resources coming from browser sources. Every browser source you have loaded is taking up more and more resources off your machine, especially if you're on a mid to lower end computer running with limited resources. Really strive to reduce these to one or two browser sources at max. In addition, if you're a person that has multiple scenes, like a main game, BRB, just chatting, ending, starting soon screen, another great way to save a ton of resources for your system is under the properties for each one of the web interfaces. At the bottom, there's an option to tell it to shut down this source when it's not visible. Make sure this is checked on every one of your browser sources in each scene so that when you switch away from that scene, it closes down those resources so they're not still running in the background. By default, this is off, and if it's off, what's going to happen is those are all going to keep running behind the scenes, and the more scenes you switch between as your stream goes on, the higher the resources it's going to take to keep it going. So if you're running on a lower end machine, making sure you're closing these down, having these auto close when you switch to the next scene, it might add a little bit of jank in terms of like when you switch scenes, there may be a second or two delay where it's still loading the resources. But in general, you can cover that up with a Stinger transition that can run locally if your system can handle it. But it's better than having 20 browser sources running all the times in the background. That's going to eat up a ton of your CPU or GPU. That really you can get a lot of that resources back quite easily, and you should, especially if you're trying to conserve your performance. I'll never forget this day.